Imagine the silence of a high-stakes boardroom in Washington, D.C., where the fate of nations is often decided by a pen stroke and a debt contract. Now, contrast that with the thunderous roar of 1,000 tractors igniting under the red sun of the Sahel at dawn. Something is changing in the heart of West Africa, and it is not a change that can be measured by an IMF spreadsheet. For decades, the world was told that Africa was a land of hunger, a continent that could only survive on the crumbs of Western aid. But today, a 37-year-old leader named Ibrahim Traoré is proving that the greatest weapon of independence is not a missile, but a seed planted in sovereign soil. We are witnessing the birth of the 180,000-acre Defiance. This is not just a farm. It is a fortress of food security designed to break the chains of global financial control once and for all. In the dusty fields of Burkina Faso, the military is no longer just patrolling borders. They are plowing fields, transforming the desert into a lush landscape of rice and grain that the old powers said was impossible. If this story of dignity and a nation finally standing on its own feet matters to you, please press like now and stay with us as we uncover this historic shift. Every acre claimed from the desert is a foot of ground lost by those who wish to keep Africa in a cycle of eternal debt. As the West faces its own internal struggles, a new empire of hope is rising from the land of upright men. But how did one man turn a rejected $450 million loan into a revolution of 180,000 acres of hope? And what happens to the global balance of power when Africa no longer needs to ask for permission to eat? The 180,000-acre initiative is not just a random agricultural project. It is a calculated military-style operation designed to achieve what decades of foreign aid could not. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso has mobilized its national army to swap their rifles for steering wheels of heavy machinery. This is the national security through food strategy in its purest form. By cultivating these massive tracts of land, the government is targeting a production of over 500,000 tons of grain, specifically maize and rice, which are the staples of the African diet. But the true genius lies in how this expansion was funded. When the IMF presented a $450 million relief package, it came with the usual strings attached: austerity measures, cuts to public spending, and a demand for Western-style transparency that often feels more like surveillance. Traoré did the unthinkable. He walked away from the table. He chose to fund this 180,000-acre revolution through a national solidarity fund, asking the Burkinabe people and the diaspora to invest in their own soil instead of global debt. Take the story of Sergeant Zerbo. A veteran of the front lines, Zerbo spent years fighting insurgents in the northern regions. Today, he sits atop a modern tractor, plowing a 500-acre plot in the Suru Valley. He tells us that while he once fought to clear the land of enemies, he is now fighting to fill the land with life. The bullet can only stop a man, he says, but the grain can save a family. This is how we win the war for our dignity. This human shift from a defensive posture to a productive one is what makes the 180,000-acre project a nightmare for the IMF. When a nation proves it can feed its army and its people without a dollar from Washington or Brussels, the old leverage of food for obedience disappears. From an African perspective, this is a masterclass in tactical sovereignty. Traoré knows that as long as the grain is imported, the policy is imported. By scaling to 180,000 acres, Burkina Faso is creating a surplus that will soon flood the regional markets, forcing neighbors like Ghana and Mali to reconsider their own dependencies. This is the moment the situation flips. The West often uses sanctions to starve a rebellious nation into submission, but Traoré has preempted this by turning the desert into a granary. He is outsmarting the IMF by changing the currency of power from paper money to tangible survival. For our viewers who understand that true freedom is the ability to sustain your own household without a master's permission, this shift is monumental. If this vision of a self-sufficient Africa resonates with the values you hold dear, please consider how important it is for this message to spread. Adding a simple comment or sharing your first reaction in one sentence helps ensure that the truth about the Sahel is not buried by mainstream media. The strategy is clear: high-yield seeds, localized irrigation systems, and a labor force that treats the farm like a battlefield. This is a breakthrough that bypasses the traditional, slow-moving, bureaucratic models of the past. As these 180,000 acres turn from dusty brown to vibrant green, they represent a bold defiance against the racial and economic stereotypes that have haunted Africa for centuries. Burkina Faso is no longer a victim waiting for a handout. It is a regional power preparing for a harvest of independence. But as the green belt expands, a darker question looms over the horizon. How will the global financial giants react when they realize their most effective tool of control, hunger, has been rendered obsolete? The world is waking up to a sound it hasn't heard in centuries, the sound of an African giant breaking its chains. The 180,000-acre agricultural blitz in Burkina Faso is no longer just a farming project. It is a geopolitical earthquake whose epicenter is the very soul of the Sahel. While the elite in Washington, Paris, and Brussels spent decades designing aid programs that were nothing more than velvet handcuffs, Ibrahim Traoré has done the unthinkable. He didn't ask for a seat at their table. He built his own. This is the climax of a silent revolution that has now become a roar, and the shock waves are rattling the windows of every central bank that once thought they owned the future of this continent. The reaction from the corridors of the IMF and the old colonial halls of Europe has been one of cold, paralyzed shock. They didn't just lose a client, they lost their leverage. For 60 years, the old world order maintained a cynical balance. Keep Africa hungry enough to be compliant, but not so hungry that it burns down the plantation. Traoré has shattered that balance with 180,000 acres of green defiance. Internal reports from Western intelligence agencies reveal a deep, systemic panic. They are not afraid of a failed state. They are terrified of a successful one that doesn't need them. The sight of Burkinabe soldiers trading their rifles for tractor steering wheels is a visual nightmare for those who profit from perpetual conflict. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated irony. As the West collapses under the weight of its own energy crises, inflation, and moral decay, the land of upright men is finding its salvation in the red dirt of its own backyard. This is the point where the narrative flips, and it flips with the force of a tidal wave. The mainstream media is scrambling to label this self-reliance as dangerous nationalism or economic isolationism. But Traoré's response to this pressure was a masterstroke of cold, unstoppable heroics. Standing before the world, he didn't just speak, he unmasked the lie. He looked the global giants in the eye and declared that the blind spot is over. Africa is no longer the world's charity case, it is its own master. This 180,000-acre harvest is a direct physical rejection of the racial stereotypes that claimed the African mind was incapable of large-scale industrial victory. Traoré has used silence as a weapon of power, letting the growth of the grain speak louder than any diplomatic protest. He didn't just expel spies and diplomats, he expelled the spirit of inferiority that had been fed to his people like a slow-acting poison for 400 years. Across the African continent, from the bustling markets of Lagos to the high plateaus of Ethiopia, the mood is nothing short of electric. This is the contagion of courage the global elite feared most. The people are no longer looking toward the Mediterranean in hope of a better life. They are looking at the soil beneath their boots. Every acre of rice harvested in Burkina Faso is a nail in the coffin of the old colonial order. The national pride tone is not just a sentiment, it is a movement. People are realizing that the chains were always psychological, and Traoré has just provided the key to the lock. The demand for dignity has officially surpassed the demand for dollars. This is the moment when the David of the Sahel didn't just hit Goliath. He made Goliath realize he was obsolete. For you, the viewer, who has lived through the shifts of history and understands the value of a hard day's work and national honor, take a long, hard look at this map. The old powers are losing their seat at the table because they forgot that a nation's true strength isn't found in a digital bank account, but in its ability to feed its own children. We are witnessing a clean intelligence revolution, where the truth is being dug out of the earth. If you have ever felt that the world was moving in the wrong direction, that the values of family, security, and self-reliance were being eroded by global bureaucrats, then this story is your victory too. This is about the right to exist without a master's permission. At this peak of tension, the silence from the West is the loudest sound in the world. They have no answer for a leader who isn't motivated by their bribes. They have no plan for a people who choose the plow over the handout. The harvest is coming, and it will be a harvest of independence that no sanction can touch and no threat can wither. The question is no longer, will Burkina Faso survive? The question is, can the West survive a world where Africa is truly free? If this story hit you in the gut, if you recognize the weight of this historic justice, then don't just watch. Mark your place in this movement. If you felt that, say, noted, so it is on record in the comments below. Let the world know that there are still people who value truth over comfort and dignity over debt. The green belt of the Sahel is expanding, and as it does, the leverage of hunger held by the old world is snapping like a dry twig. Traoré isn't just planting seeds. He is planting a future where the African lion no longer begs for scraps, but hunts for its own destiny. The climax isn't a final explosion. It is the unstoppable growth of a crop that belongs to the people who were brave enough to plant it in the face of the storm. The transformation of these 180,000 acres is doing more than just filling silos. It is rewriting the social contract between the African citizen and the state. For generations, the streets of Ouagadougou were filled with the quiet desperation of a youth looking north toward the Mediterranean, seeking a future that their own soil seemingly could not provide. But today, the narrative of migration is being replaced by a narrative of cultivation. Ibrahim Traoré has effectively turned the agricultural sector into a theater of national service, where pride is the primary currency. We are seeing a profound shift in civil life. Families that were once separated by the need to find work abroad are now reuniting on the communal farms of the National Development Achievements. This is the Traoré Doctrine in action, creating a society that is discipline-heavy, calm, and unstoppable. In the political sphere, the success of this 180,000-acre green revolution is cementing a new type of leadership that the West struggles to categorize. It is not merely about policy. It is about the victory of dignity. By proving that a state-owned agricultural model can outperform the complex, often predatory multinational systems, Burkina Faso is setting a precedent that threatens the very foundation of foreign economic intervention in Africa. Politically, this has forced a West African firewall against foreign intelligence networks that traditionally used food shortages to spark civil unrest. When the people are fed by their own hands, they become immune to the external, covert power battles that have plagued the Sahel for decades. The impact on regional balance is equally seismic. As Burkina Faso scales its production, it is no longer just a landlocked country. It is becoming a regional breadbasket. This shift is forcing neighboring nations to choose between the old colonial trade routes and a new, autonomous African alliance. We are seeing the rise of a sovereignty-first economy, where the 180,000 acres serve as a physical proof of concept. The racial and colonial lie that Africa cannot manage its own vast resources without European supervision is being dismantled in real time. Every ton of rice harvested is a rejection of the old mining and agricultural order that kept the continent as a raw material backyard for the globe. However, this rapid progress brings its own set of tensions. Inside the cities, the air is thick with a sense of clean intelligence revolution, where the population is hyper-aware of their newfound power. There's a growing intolerance for any return to the old ways of dependency. The people are no longer just spectators, they are stakeholders in this 180,000-acre empire. If you recognize that a nation's true power is measured by its ability to protect its own heritage and feed its own children, you are seeing history in the making. If you want part 2 on how Traoré plans to defend these gains from external pressure, subscribe now and join this growing community of truth seekers. As we look at the silent streets that were once loud with protest, but are now busy with the hum of local industry, we see a national pride tone that is both infectious and dangerous to those who wish to keep Africa weak. The old masters are watching their influence evaporate, as the people of the Sahel realize that their desert is not a wasteland, but a gold mine of potential. The 180,000-acre project has become a spiritual awakening for a continent that was told to stay silent for too long. But as the regional balance shifts and the alliance of sovereign states grows stronger, the ultimate question moves beyond the soil. How will Washington and the old guard respond when they realize the African lion is no longer hungry for their aid, but hungry for its own destiny? Inside the beltway of Washington, D.C., the 180,000-acre agricultural blitz in Burkina Faso is no longer being viewed as a simple farming project. It is being analyzed as a significant shift in national security. For decades, the U.S. and its allies have used agricultural exports and food diplomacy as a soft power tool to maintain stability and influence in the Sahel. However, the Traoré doctrine has created a West African firewall that is effectively blocking this traditional leverage. Intelligence reports now suggest that as Burkina Faso achieves food sovereignty, the old mechanisms of the IMF and World Bank are losing their grip on the region. There is a growing concern among global economists that this model of industrial replacement, not protest, will inspire a continent-wide rejection of Western-dictated economic policies. The U.S. military-industrial complex is also watching closely, as a self-sufficient Burkina Faso becomes a more resilient and less predictable partner in the fight against regional instability. From the perspective of a veteran observer in the West, this is a clean intelligence revolution that doesn't rely on bullets, but on the relentless output of the land. The narrative in Western media is shifting from Africa in crisis to a more guarded Sahel in defiance. Critics in the EU and Washington are beginning to realize that their diplomatic silence during the era of dependency has been replaced by Traoré's unstoppable momentum. The question being asked in closed-door sessions is no longer how to help Burkina Faso, but how to compete with a nation that has decided its soil is more valuable than foreign debt. This is a geopolitical chess move that has caught the old guard off guard, forcing them to confront the reality that the old mining and agricultural order is ending. As the global balance of power continues to tilt, the real worry for the West is not just a lost market, but the loss of a narrative that once kept 1 billion people waiting for a permission to prosper. Can the old powers adapt to an Africa that finally knows its own worth? Or will they watch from the sidelines as the Sahel redraws the entire map of global influence? The 180,000 acres of Burkina Faso are no longer just land. They have become a sacred warning to a world that grew arrogant in its dominance. If the alliance of sovereign states in the Sahel continues to expand this model of defiant productivity over the next 12 months, the very foundation of Western economic leverage in Africa will not just crack, it will vanish. We're standing at a crossroads in human history, where the humble seed is proving to be more powerful than the digital printing presses of a central bank. But let this be a warning. The old world order has never surrendered its power without a fight. History teaches us that when a nation dares to feed itself, The old guard responds with economic warfare, hidden sanctions, and the manufacture of chaos. Yet, they have met their match in Ibrahim Traoré, a leader who has traded the empty promises of foreign diplomats for the cold, hard reality of a national harvest. He has transformed from a soldier into a historical icon, a strategist who understands that Africa's true gold isn't buried in a mine owned by a multinational. It is breathing in the lungs of the farmers who refuse to be audited by a foreign master ever again. As we watch these 180,000 acres flourish against all odds, we must look beyond the horizon. Is this the moment the forgotten continent finally leads the world in moral and economic sovereignty? Is Traoré the dangerous rebel portrayed by a panicked media? Or is he the long-awaited architect of a hope that was suppressed for 400 years? The answer is written in the silence of the West and the roaring awakening of the African spirit. For those of you watching from the heartland of America or the vast reaches of Canada, men who have served your country, built your families, and still believe that justice and duty are the bedrock of any civilization, this story is your story too. You recognize the value of a man who stands his ground. You understand that a nation's true power is measured by the strength of its heritage and the ability to protect its own children without begging for a handout. The green belt of the Sahel is expanding, and as it does, the leverage of hunger held by global bureaucrats is snapping like a dry twig. Traoré hasn't just planted crops. He has planted a future where the African lion no longer begs for scraps from a Western table, but hunts for its own destiny. The climax of this journey isn't a violent explosion. It is the quiet, unstoppable growth of a harvest that belongs entirely to the people who were brave enough to plant it in the face of a global storm. If this vision of a self-sufficient Africa resonates with the values of independence and grit that you hold dear, then stand with us. If you believe that every nation deserves the right to feed its own children without a master's permission, and if the spirit of this victory of dignity touches your heart, then I invite you to make your voice heard. If you still believe in justice, press like before you go, and share this story with someone who needs to see the world as it truly is. Subscribe to stay with us as we track the rise of a continent that has finally found its voice. May we all remember that the earth belongs to those who cherish it, and may God bless the land of upright men as they march toward a future of their own making.